This episode is sponsored by Day by Day Book, a guided journal that helps you navigate the ups and downs of change while creating a life you love. For more information on the classic, recovery, or teen day book, go to livedaybyday.com.
I had this thing I try to remember in my head all the time is that, when you have a dream or a small problem, it starts way back in the back of your head and it's like a whisper, right? This dream comes around your head and then it starts to really nag at your ear. And then it's so loud. That dream is so loud that you have to execute on it, right? And that's when you know you have to get smarter about the problem and start to develop a solution from scratch.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. When you think about the challenges that come up in your life, are you someone who thinks first about the problem or the solution? Marie Newman has always held the philosophy, if you don't see the solution, build it from scratch. In her newly released book, A Life Made from Scratch, a prescriptive memoir about building movements, life changes, businesses, and campaigns from scratch, she shares her life stories and lessons learned with brutal honesty, humor, and grace. She offers us a glimpse into her rise to controversial congresswoman as a mother of a transgender daughter, anti-bullying activist, and marketing executive who took on the Chicago political machine and won, guided by her passion for helping her constituents create a better day every day. Marie is also a nonprofit CEO and former Moms Demand Action spokesperson and national LGBTQ+ advocate. In addition to those roles, she's a mom of 2 adult children, consultant and co-host of Once in College, a delightful podcast that shares lessons learned from the most intimate and insane moments of college, back when you were the smartest, stupid person ever. To say that Marie is a busy woman is truly an understatement. Marie, welcome to the podcast. It is such an honor to have you join us today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here and thank you so much.
There are so many twists and turns to your story. And so I often just let guests kind of start where they feel it makes the most sense. But maybe you could just give us a little bit of background where you grew up, some basic foundational stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and in the middle of the Midwest and the middle of everything, right? And so, nothing remarkable. We were just a family that grew up with great values in the Midwest, and I enjoyed my growing up very much. I had a great childhood, but nothing terribly remarkable about it. I will say that it was instilled early in us that as people, we have to do what we can, when we can, whenever we can, and as much as we can, and work ethic was a big deal in our house. My dad left the house at 6:00 every morning and got home at 7, so it was a long day. And then we all started having long days. So I have 3 siblings and all of them very successful personally and professionally. And I don't think that was an accident because work ethic is everything. So as a result of that, I had that grounding, went to college and actually started to be an activist in civil rights, women's rights, racial equity, economic equity, healthcare for all way back then. I mean, this is 100 years ago now. So I started young and hung in there, and I will say the other thing that I just was in my DNA for when I was a very young person is the sense that of fairness and justice, right? So it is not surprising that I am a social justice warrior in every way. So in my 20s and 30s, I worked on gun reform and economic equity, trying to get fair wages for folks, women's rights. In my 40s, got more active in the gun reform movement, worked in health equity to bring healthcare to everybody, to every economic strata. And when my oldest child, Quinn, was right around 8, 9, 10, started to get bullied traumatically. So we had some significant challenges around that and realized, wow, nobody knows what to do with this thing called bullying. I mean, this was way back in 2009. What I realized is that I had this other saying beyond the make it from scratch is that when there's a big sticky ball in the middle of the room, in the middle of the party, and nobody wants to touch it, but everybody sees it, like, and everybody keeps walking around, you know, sometimes you got to pick that sticky ball up and do something with it. And that is usually me. It's not necessarily that I've been qualified every time.
Who cares? At least you're doing it, right? I mean, the fact that you jump right in.
As many say, that never stopped you before. So,
fellow Midwesterner coming from Chicago, coming from that same background of work ethic, I find it, and this is something that fascinates me, and it might just be kind of the pocket of which I grew up in, which was a little bit more, I feel like, protected in a way. But did you feel that it was instilled in you as you grew up to speak out? Like, did you feel comfortable doing that in the very beginning? Because I'm so fascinated by that. I feel like that's something that you kind of learn.
You do learn that because, you know, we had, in fact, my parents were Red Rock Republicans, and wonderful things about them, but, you know, we just disagreed on politics. But the upshot of that is that they really were, you know, do-it-yourselfers, right? To save money, we were not wealthy at all, at all. So, you know, you did everything yourself, and you were very self-competent, right? My bent on that, I am believe in God, spiritual. I used to be Catholic and love all the Catholic traditions, still celebrate them. But what I do believe is that I believe that souls come and go, right? And so I just believe that the soul that was before me that I inherited really believed in social justice, because no one else in my family was really like that. Like, nobody else was willing to go out on a limb and be really mouthy. And I was from a very young age. I'll never forget, in high school one time, there was a table of boys making fun of the special needs kids. And I went over all, 90 pounds of me soaking wet, went over there, and they were all seniors and I was a freshman, and I let them let it rip. And they all felt horrible.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Badly.
Yeah. Rightly, they should have.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. If I had scissor hands, it would have been a bloody mess. So that was early on. And I don't know where that comes from, to answer your question directly. We having that sense of, sometimes my husband calls it fearlessness and not caring what other people think. That combination is both wonderful and awful, right? Because I can be a bull in a china cabinet too. So, or china shop. It's good and bad. When I got to my 40s and started building anti-bullying programs in my own school system, I had to fight my school system, right? Then we came together and collaborated, right? But first it was a fight. I tell the story, and I tell moms and activists this story all the time, because it was my first rebel move. I was in my low 40s, and we were in a middle school where the middle school was refusing to believe that we had a significant bullying problem. I'm like, honey, hold my wine, because Jesus Christ, so, I just knew it. And so, and the principal and the superintendent wouldn't see me. So I decided they shared an office, and I decided that I had a home office and I had management consulting business and, a separate office, and then my home office. So I scooped up my home office, a big little filing cabinet, my laptop, and a table. And I just went to their office and I said, well, I'll stay here and wait for you. If you don't have time for me, I'll wait in between meetings. So I'm on calls in the office, in their outer office, and like tapping away. And every time he went by, because he had to go to the bathroom, right? And I was like, hey, how's it going? And then they finally were like, Mrs. Newman, you cannot stay here. And I said, oh, but I can.
You obviously don't know me.
Yes, and I will. And so then finally he's like, oh, good Lord. So he let me come in. And then I was a management consultant, right? So I built all kinds of data tables about how our town was being overcome by bullying, because it was true. There were, one night I got a call for 60 different sets of parents crying, saying, oh, my child is getting this and my child is getting that. And so we all came together, right? Then we built a coalition, came together, and did build an anti-bullying policy. Then the state of Illinois asked me to do the same for Northern Illinois school districts. Then I wrote a book on anti-bullying, and I built a national nonprofit called Team Up to Stop Bullying with my partner Sears.
Oh my God. But this is prior to going into politics.
Oh, wait, this
was,
15 years before I ever decided to get into politics. So I became the spokesperson for Moms Demand Action. Now, all the time I have a business, so even when I had the nonprofit, I had a business too. So it was very busy time, and raising kids.
Right. And that.
Then, 2015, 2016 came along, and folks started asking me to run for Congress. And I was like, I have never even run for student council. Are you kidding me? And are you high?
Isn't that beautiful to look back on that, though, that was such an absurd thought?
Oh, it was absurd. I printed out the Illinois candidates guideline probably 3 or 4 times and then threw it out, pulled it down, threw it out because I wasn't
Yeah.
in the right mindset. Then ultimately, and hopefully I'm not offending any of your listeners, but I was not a fan of Donald Trump. And that night, when he was elected, I'm not a crier. Like I've only cried. The only time I ever cried was when my kids were born, and that's it. Like I'm not a crier. I don't get overtaken that way. And so I bawled and then stayed in my pajamas for a 36-hour period and looked up, how do I run? And so that's when I decided that I would run for office. That next morning, I signed up for a wonderful training organization called the Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership here in Illinois. And it changed my world completely. It weirdly got accepted. I had a day to get all my stuff in. It was a ton of stuff I had to get in, and they accepted me. And then I was part of that group, ran for office in 2018, lost by 2% from an incumbent, part of the Chicago machine, and then ran again and won in 2020. And then in 2022, I got redistricted out.
And what does that mean? Restricted out?
So in Illinois, we lost population, right, during the census.
Oh,
So
yes.
when that happens, you lose one of your districts. There were 18 districts, congressional districts in Illinois, and they had to skinny it down to 17. So they pulled mine into 6 pieces. And when I ran in the next district over, that was, not my original district, nobody knew me there. And there was, there was definitely some hardcore bare knuckle politics. There's a lot of conservatives against me. So that happened. But as I say in my book, it was just time to build something from scratch again, right? So I became a nonprofit CEO of folks with intellectual disabilities and loved it for a year. Realized, oh my gosh, that's not my forever love. I solved some problems there. They're doing great, moved on, and went back to health equity consulting to make sure everybody has health care until we get to a space where actually we have everybody has health care. And then worked on some other DC coalitions and helped them with some equity matters there. And then wrote this book, A Life Made from Scratch. And I just finished writing my next book that'll go into revision soon.
That is amazing. And just to tell everybody, the book comes out tomorrow. So go get it. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about the book, but I have one thing to ask you. What was and I know maybe there's many, there's not just one, but what was one of the takeaways from being in political life? Were there lessons learned? Were there things that you took away from that were aha moments? I mean, I'm always so fascinated by politics, and more so now, maybe less so now. I don't know. Maybe I'm less fascinating now, but
right.
Yeah,
It's exhausting. I've been working with a lot of activist groups, trying to bolster them up and help them understand what works and what doesn't work. Use your time wisely and all of those good things. But what did I learn? So much. I would say the number one thing is that contrary to popular belief, that across all the political spectrum, about 70% of the people that go into politics go in because they do want to be of service, and they usually stay pretty true to that. The problem is the other 30% that go into it for power and money, right? Knowing that, even though if you don't agree with me, like my colleagues across the aisle don't agree with much that they do, but many of them were there for principled reasons and they felt like they could make a difference and they wanted to do well by their constituents. So it is not for lack of intention. The problem is at the top of both parties, there's some inertia and lack of understanding what Americans want, right? So my next big insight was, wow, you don't get every day, do you, dudes? Like, and they are mostly dudes.
a lot of touch. Yeah.
Like, honey, you don't get what it's like. In my 20s, I didn't have healthcare for 6 years because I was working 2 jobs and I didn't have a job that provided healthcare and I couldn't afford it. So I know how that feels, right?
Yeah.
I knew how it felt to work 2 jobs. I know those experiences, right? And most of the people at the top of the power structure just are so desperately out of touch with, particularly in this administration, couldn't imagine not having healthcare, working 2 jobs, and understanding how expensive milk and eggs are. They just don't understand that
the
at
basics.
all. For me, the out of touchness was very disheartening. And then the third piece is that across party fighting is just as bad as the intra party fighting and it's really sad.
Yes, I know.
And then I will say the last thing that I learned is that both parties live or die by money, right? And if we didn't have money in politics, it would give them back 50% of their time, 50% of their time. So wherever you are on the political spectrum, work to get money out of politics and everything's going to go a lot better. Every country that doesn't have money in politics is doing a lot better than we are right now.
Right. Okay. And one other thing that because I know this is a time of a lot of unrest, do you have any words of advice, just coming from someone who has been in politics and the world as it is today? What would be your suggestion for somebody who is feeling a little lost, a little in the spin cycle of it all? Just from hearing, I mean, I'm not even turning on the news half the time anymore because I just can't, and which makes me feel very out of touch, which I don't like.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. And people come to me every day. I've been doing these speaking engagements with large groups of first-time activists, and they're asking all those same questions. They'll say, make comments like, Marie, I feel so unprotected by all of our politicians of any, I feel
Yeah.
completely unprotected. My mom relies on Medicaid and other aid, and it's being cut dramatically, and she's not going to be able to get her medication. Marie, I'm really worried about the fact that my child and he has special needs and his program was just cut, right? So this is what I'm hearing. How can I get involved, right? Because I have personal problems that are relevant to our nation's problems. And what I say back is that it is very simple. You can start today and start with just phone calls to your member of Congress to say, hey, if you're a Republican, stop cutting all of our services. If you are a Democrat, start fighting for us. Start fighting. I don't see any fight happening. And get a plan together. And they can do things. So when they say, oh, we can't do anything because we're not in power, to the Democrats, it is absolutely not true. There are tons of legislative and procedural matters that they can put forth that will stop a lot of this stuff. They're just not acting in unison, and you do have to act in unison and solidarity. So calling your member of Congress, very important. And people don't have to be afraid. You don't have to know policy or the lexicon or the vocabulary. Just say, hey, my mom's Medicaid is getting cut. I don't like it. Go right to the problem that you have and let them know. You don't have to discuss policy or be a nerdball about, economics. Just say, wow, really worried. I can't afford my kids' soccer shoes because you know why? I had to buy some eggs last week and gas.
Right. Is your congresswoman or congressman able to like pick up the phone and talk to you, or are you doing it?
So this is what a little secret, right? So every congressperson has to document every call. So when you call in, they do have to check that, in fact, you are calling. Now, call where you live, right? Call the congressperson where you live, because then they will take the call. We are where we are. You call who is representing you, your senator. You have 2 state senators you can call, and you have a congressperson that you can call, right? And let them know you're very upset and you're very concerned. If you're worried with the corruption going on in the White House and by Elon Musk, let them know, wow, that dude scares me a lot. Just be straightforward. You don't have to know policy or know how to talk, and you don't have to, of course, be respectful and, don't scream.
Right. That's helpful.
But let them know, hey, I'm really upset.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Because I feel like people are feeling helpless, and myself included. I mean, I feel like I talk about it and then it gets me into a state of, so it does. It can work you into a lather.
What gets congresspeople and senators much more their attention is that if you show up in person, meaning set a meeting with them or just show up, by the way, perfectly legal just to show up at their office in their district. And senators usually have 5 or 6 offices, and members of Congress usually have representatives usually have 2 district offices. You can just show up and say, hey, I want to talk to someone, and the chief of staff or the district director will talk to you. So yes, you can just show up.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to the book.
Okay. It's called A Life Made from Scratch.
So tell me a little bit more about that, just that concept.
What happened was I was coming out of Congress, and a few publishers and a few people in DC said, hey, Marie, we'd like you to write a book. You have a very unique journey. And I was like, are you kidding me? No, that would be the most boring book in the world. Like, oh, come on. And then my team started to knock around a little bit. And it's like, okay, Marie, you learned how to raise a transgender child. And then your other child was severely bullied, and you built a national organization. You've built movements around gun reform and healthcare equity. You ran for Congress and won. So yeah, I think you have some
You got a bit of a story.
Yeah. I was like, okay, so let's take it first, because I'm big on pilots, right? I'm a management consultant, so I like doing pilot programs, see if it works.
Yeah.
So I started writing it, and I was like, oh, maybe there is some stuff in here. So I tell my story of, in my 20s, being subjected to misogyny all the time. We all have as women, right? So I'm not telling anything new. I'm just telling my stories. Some of them are funny. Some of them are creepy, right? So share those stories. And then in my 30s, about getting much more involved with activism, and 40s, understanding that, nobody's going to pick up that sticky ball. So guess what? When you don't see the solutions you need in the world, you do have to build from scratch. By the way, I would offer to everybody on listening in that when you build something from scratch with your own hands, it always works better. It just does, because it's really addressing the problem from your purview. So what I decided to do then is write those anecdotes, how I did these things, built anti-bullying movement, running for Congress, all those things, helping my daughter be successful as a trans woman. I wrote them down, and then I wrote helpful hints at the end. So I have takeaways and lessons at the end of each chapter.
I love that.
When I do speaking engagements, I point to that. And then I also have some planning guides that are available on my website that help you do things like building a social movement, that kind of thing. But in my book, what I wanted to be is say, I don't sugarcoat anything. Like, some of these things are very hard. Some of them were easier than others, but running for Congress is hard. Being in Congress is very hard. My family is challenged with mental health issues, my entire family, right? And so what I realized in Congress was, the world works in mysterious ways. God works in mysterious, whatever you believe in. And I think one of the reasons where I was redirected by the universe to doing some other work is that my family, even though my kids were grown, 24 and 26 now, they needed my attention. They needed my help. And so that was one of those very personal moments. I had an epiphany when I lost my reelection in 22. I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not supposed to be doing this right now. I'm just not. And sometimes I'll just tell you, God has to put like a nuclear bomb in front of me, and then like a moat, and then like a large special ops army, because I'm an idiot. I'm dense as can be. I'll just keep walking through.
It does sound like, though, you've moved down the path, right? Like initially things come to you and then you're like, well, no. And then it's like, well, maybe. And then you kind of, I feel like that's how we often do it. You kind of, the initial thought is like, no way. And then you start to warm up to the idea, and then it's like, oh, wow, this is actually my path. But you said something so interesting to me, because, and I know that this is a hard thing to do, and I know you weren't making it sound like it's easy, like starting one movement and then starting other movements. Like, this is a loaded question, I know, but like, how do you start a movement? Did you just go one person at a time?
I did these how-to manuals. There's 6 of them. And one of them is how to build a movement. How about that? And,
I'm going to get one of those.
Yeah. And they all have some things in common, right? Is that you always start out with assessing the problem. How big is the problem? What is the root of the problem? Why is it? So whether it is an illness, a social injustice, building something in your community, whatever the problem is, you do have to do research around it. So that's your first step, right? And then you have to see how prevalent that problem is in your immediate area. Does everybody have this problem? Do only some people have this problem? So sizing up the problem. And then building a team, right? Like, you build your coalition of people that want to work with you. Then you have to put a plan together, right? If it requires a budget, make sure you have budget to do it. If it requires experts, get those experts on board. But use your team to help build this plan so that you can make it a reality and move forward. And in these little manuals, and in my book, I share this too, like all of the various steps, how you get to places, right? So you don't start understanding the problem fully when you just set out. I had this thing I try to remember in my head all the time, is that, when you have a dream or a small problem, it starts way back in the back of your head, and it's like a whisper, right? This dream comes around your head, and then it starts to really nag at your ear. And for your listeners, I've got my finger pointing at my ear right now. So it just nags at you, right?
Yeah.
And then it's so loud. That dream is so loud that you have to execute on it, right? And that's when you have to get smarter about the problem and start to develop a solution from scratch, right? So those are all the common steps in each of these movements that I've built, that I felt compelled to do it. No one else would do it. No one else would pick up the sticky ball. And I knew it had to be a custom solution.
What I hear from that too is, and just how you described that, because I've personally felt that, I'm sure many women that are listening have felt that too. When you have that nudge, that whisper that becomes louder and louder, there is an inherent energy behind that. I feel like that's when, when we say we're in the flow, or when some things just start to happen and they come to you, I can imagine that you gained momentum through that, right? And then it's like step by step by step, things got bigger, bigger, bigger. You were able to build more and more and more. So it's kind of an energetic thing, I feel like, too.
The kinetic energy of the desire and will you have inside you is found by other energy forces, right? So we all come together, and we are powerful together. And I had great people in my lives. And a lot of time, this is one thing that I would offer to everybody, is do pay attention to the third tier players in your overall stage play of your life, right? Because there's so many times when someone was just a periphery person that was lovely and smart, but I didn't think that much of the exchange, right? And then
Yeah.
later, that person becomes pivotal. And that happened to me in business. People gave me jobs that I met for no reason. I just bumped into them and I got a job from them later. In community services, when I built the anti-bullying movement, they came in and we all worked together. In politics, I met people that, later became chairs of my campaigns, right? So
Yeah.
pay attention to those kind of peripheral people because they become really important and dear friends later.
That is a really good insight. In writing this book, it sounds like it's kind of been, this has been probably a cathartic thing too, of like all that you've been through, all that you've learned. What would be your takeaway? I know that you are a mom of a transgender daughter, so you've had that and the bullying piece, which I didn't realize both. Like, so you have two kids, right? So you
Two
had
kids,
that
yeah,
going
and
on both.
separate issues. So one was trans
Yep.
and one was bullied, but not the same. Yeah.
Right. But there is something in the book, obviously, around that too. I was going
Yeah.
to say we could talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that and just how
Yeah.
that you learned from that experience too, which there are probably a lot of moms out there that could hear from you on that too. So it's good to know that you've written more about that topic. But I was just going to say what's next, but it sounds like the next book.
Yeah. So I like to challenge myself. And so I got done with this book in April of last year. And then a few publishers gave me an offer to publish it. Kohler Books decided to take my book, and I said yes, and they're amazing. They've been a great partner. They really get me. And then I had this idea kind of running around my head for, probably the last 2 years, and never fancied myself to be a fiction writer because it's really, really hard. My personal faves, Ann Patchett and Matt Haig, brilliant writers, right? I love both of them. And I have a long list of others, but and I'm a voracious reader. And I was like, well, I can't do this. This is really hard. This is not happening. And then, but it was again it was just bugging me enough where I'm like, oh no, this is actually a real story. And so I started to put it together as, I had this folder going, right? The great author Michael Lewis will say this is that two things you have to have as an author is you have to have an idea and a way to organize the idea. And then secondly, you have to sit your ass in the chair and write it. Like,
That's the hard part.
I'm very good at organizing crap, but then I had to sit in the chair and, get my high knee together, right? So I did, and then it became something, and it became 300 pages. So
You're not at the liberty to share at this point. We'll
I
find out
can't
later.
share at this point. I will tell you, it is about, because I like to use my own relational stories. So it is about a woman that is the main character, the protagonist, and she is from the Midway Airport area in Chicago. And she's now a DC attorney that is working on a very, very high level whistleblower case.
Ooh, that sounds good. And did you have to kind of learn the arc of the story and the whole thing? Because I'm with you on that one. I've always thought that would be amazing to do, and I'm like, it's a whole learning.
This was something I learned from a couple of lectures I went to from great writers. Is you have to have a board that is compiled of scenes, characters, and backstories. Because if you don't keep track of all that stuff, I call it the board of lies, because I imagine pathological liars and ex murderers have to do this because you can't keep track of all the lies, right? You gotta write them down.
Map it out. You got to map it out.
Like map that sucker up. So I have the board of lies, and it's sitting right in front of me right now. That's how I keep track of the story, and there's a lot of technical stuff in here. So legal and pharmaceutical, because it's
Nice. Okay, another hint.
yeah, right. Because two of my least favorite types of companies are health insurance and pharmaceutical companies, because I've had to fight with them a lot over the years, and they don't like me either. So it's very mutual. Yeah.
But this is interesting because that I'm sure informs your character.
Yeah, it does.
One last thing that I have to talk to you about before we finish, the podcast, which, by the way, I've sent it to 3 friends because I so love the concept. I actually went into the first 2, but I think I'm going to be hooked. What gave you this idea to co-host that podcast? I love it, love it, love it.
Was not my idea. It was my brilliant friend from marketing and advertising. He and I were both advertising executives in similar times. We met 25 years ago, probably. His name is Pete Griffith, and he is the founder and conceptor of Once in College. And he came to me about 6 months ago with this idea. Hey, Marie, do you have any college stories? And I'm like, Pete, have you seen me? Have you met me? I had a good time in college. I had a really good time in college. But he knew that about me. And so I said, yeah. And he's like, I think you need to tell that story on my new podcast. And I was like, okay. So then he said, Kate, can you contribute? So he wanted me to be a contributor and a producer too. So I did. And so he's the founder. He finds the stories from friends and colleagues and associates over the years and then builds them. I wrote 2 or 3 of them, my stories, and then and recorded them. He asked me to record my own stories, and so I did. But it's mostly his work and his friend Rob Wallace. And so it's onceincollege.com, and they're funny.
I'm hooked already. And that was the most recent one. I was like, I came from the Chicago area. I might end up hearing a story about somebody I know. Like, you could very easily went to KU. I don't know. I mean, it could be a random thing.
It absolutely could happen.
Bree, it was so wonderful to chat with you today. And I thank you for your time, especially because right now, in the midst of your book tour, which is starting in a day, I know you don't have a lot of it. So I really, really do appreciate it. But it's been wonderful. And I can't wait to get your book.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled. And my website is marienewmanstudio.com, but it's available on Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org, which is an indie source. So
all of Marie's links are going to be on the show notes, too. So you can find her there as well.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Marie. Have a wonderful tour. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. That's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.